In December of 1943, something happened at a military airbase in the Philippines that no historian, no scientist, absolutely no one has been able to explain to this day. Soldiers were going about their regular duties when they suddenly heard the sound of an approaching aircraft. They looked up and saw a P-40 fighter plane coming in for a landing. Nothing unusual about that, right? There was a war going on. Planes landed all the time. But something was very wrong with this one. The plane was covered in bullet holes, the fuel tank was completely empty, and when they checked the aircraft identification number, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. This plane had officially disappeared over a year ago. It had been written off. The pilot had been declared dead. His family had already received the letter saying he was gone forever. And yet here it was, landing like nothing had happened. But the most terrifying part came when the soldiers finally opened the cockpit. What they found inside made grown men, hardened soldiers who had seen the worst of war, turn away in horror. This is the story of the Ghost Plane of Mindanao, and after 80 years, no one has been able to explain what really happened that day. To understand just how strange this story is, we first need to look at what was happening in the Philippines at the beginning of World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, Japan launched a massive offensive across all of Southeast Asia. The Philippines was one of their main targets because it was home to major American military bases. The Japanese attacked island after island, and American forces were pushed back under the overwhelming assault. It was a desperate time. There were not enough planes, not enough fuel, not enough of anything, really. Pilots went out on missions knowing that their chances of coming back were about 50-50, sometimes even worse than that. The P-40 Warhawk fighters were the backbone of American aviation in this region. These were reliable machines, with that famous shark mouth painted on the nose, which became one of the most recognizable symbols of the war. But even the best pilots in the best machines could not always survive against the superior numbers of Japanese aircraft. Every single day, someone did not come back from a mission. Planes crashed into jungles, fell into the sea, or simply vanished without a trace. War is war, and people gradually got used to the losses, even though you can never truly get used to something like that. In late 1942, one of the pilots received a routine assignment. It was just a standard reconnaissance flight over territory held by the Japanese. Nothing special. These flights happened every day. He took off in his P-40. The radio was working fine. Everything was going according to plan. And then he just vanished. The radio went silent, the plane never returned to base, and no distress signals were ever received. This was strange, but not unique. Planes disappeared over the jungles and the sea all the time. Could have been shot down by the Japanese, could have been engine failure, could have been pilot disorientation leading to a crash into a mountain. There were so many possibilities, and checking what actually happened was often simply impossible.
They searched for him for several days, combing through the area where they had last contact, but they found nothing. No wreckage, no parachute, nothing at all. It was as if the plane had simply dissolved into thin air. Eventually, the pilot was officially declared missing in action and later declared dead. His family back in America received the standard letter of condolences, his belongings were packed up and sent home, and his name was added to the long list of casualties. The story was over. At least, that is what everyone thought. A whole year passed. The fighting continued in the Philippines, the situation was slowly changing, and the Americans had begun their counteroffensive, taking back island after island. The war went on as wars do, and everyone had long forgotten about that missing pilot. So many people had gone missing during that time. The list was very long. And then, in December of 1943, approximately 1 year after the disappearance, something happened at one of the air bases that defies all logic and reason. It was an ordinary day. Soldiers were busy with their usual tasks when the men on duty heard the sound of an aircraft engine. The sound was strange, though. The engine was sputtering and coughing, clearly struggling to keep running. Everyone looked up and saw a P-40 fighter coming in for landing. The plane looked absolutely terrible. The entire body was covered in bullet holes. Parts of the outer shell were missing, and smoke was pouring out of the engine. It was a mystery how this machine was even staying in the air. But somehow, the plane managed to land. It was not a perfect landing, but it was a landing. The aircraft rolled down the runway and came to a stop. The soldiers rushed toward the plane. The first thing they did was check the identification number, and immediately they were confused. They recognized this number. This was the same plane that had disappeared a year ago, the same one that had been written off long ago, the same one whose pilot had been declared dead. How was this possible? Where had it been for an entire year? Who was flying it? With growing dread, they approached the cockpit. The canopy was closed, and it was hard to see anything through the dirty glass. When they finally managed to open it, they saw the pilot. He was dead, but not just dead. He had been dead for a very long time. The body was heavily decomposed, and it was obvious that this man had not died yesterday or even a week ago. Experts who examined the remains later estimated that the pilot had been dead for at least several months, possibly since the very moment of the original disappearance. And here is the question that drives people insane. If the pilot had been dead for a long time, then who landed this plane?
Planes do not fly themselves. Someone had to be controlling it. Someone had to direct it to this specific airbase. Someone had to perform the landing. The P-40 was not some modern drone with autopilot. This was a machine from the 1940s that required constant manual control. But there was only one person in that cockpit, and he had been dead long before the plane touched down. After this incident, the military tried to conduct an investigation, but they could not figure out anything substantial. There was a war going on. There were no resources to spare for studying paranormal events, so the case was quickly closed and classified. But the questions remained. The first and most obvious question: where was the plane for an entire year? A P-40 has enough fuel for maybe a few hours of flight at most. Even if we imagine that the pilot landed somewhere and was hiding, how did he take off again? Where did he get fuel? And why did he never make radio contact during that whole year? The second question is even stranger: the condition of the aircraft. The bullet holes looked fresh. Some parts of the plane looked like they had been in combat very recently. But at the same time, the pilot had been dead for many months. So does that mean someone else was flying this plane and getting into fights after the pilot died? Who?
And the third, most disturbing question: who landed the plane? This could not have happened by accident. A plane cannot find an airfield and perform a landing on its own. You need a living, conscious pilot who can see the runway, control the speed, lower the landing gear, maintain the correct angle of descent. A dead body is physically incapable of doing any of that. Over the decades, people have come up with all kinds of theories trying to explain this story. The first theory is a time anomaly. Maybe the plane somehow got caught in a time loop or passed through some kind of tear in space and time. For the plane, only minutes passed, but for the rest of the world, it was a whole year. This sounds like science fiction, but no one has ever offered a rational explanation that actually works. The second theory is that the plane was found and flown by someone else. Maybe somebody discovered the crashed plane in the jungle, repaired it, and flew it. But then why was the original pilot's body still in the cockpit? Why would anyone choose to fly with a decomposing corpse sitting next to them? And why did this mysterious second pilot disappear right before the landing?
The third theory involves the paranormal. The ghost of the pilot returned to bring his body home, or something like that. Many indigenous peoples of the Philippines believe in spirits and in the idea that the dead can return to finish unfinished business. Maybe the pilot wanted to be found and buried properly, rather than left to rot in the jungle forever. The fourth theory is military disinformation or a mistake in the records. Maybe there was confusion with the aircraft identification numbers, or the story was deliberately distorted for propaganda purposes. War is chaos, and documents from that era are not always reliable. The truth is that we will probably never know for certain what happened that day in the Philippines. Too much time has passed, the witnesses are no longer alive, and the documents are either classified or lost forever. But this story continues to fascinate people because it asks fundamental questions about the nature of reality. We like to think that we understand how the world works, that the laws of physics apply equally everywhere and at all times. And then something like this happens, something that cannot be explained, and we realize how little we actually know.
Maybe there are things that science cannot explain yet. Maybe there are places on Earth where the normal rules simply do not apply. Maybe the boundary between life and death is not as clear as we would like to believe. Or maybe this is just a beautiful legend that was born from the chaos of war and the human tendency to see mystery where there is none. What do you think? Write in the comments which version seems most believable to you. And if you know of any similar stories, please share them. In the next video, I will tell you about another mystery of World War II, strange glowing orbs that followed pilots on both sides of the war and that no one has been able to explain to this day. Subscribe so you do not miss it.